silent or take them off the table. And if you have smartphones, we all do, take them off the table because they do give feedback. For the public, you may notice that the committee members are using their laptops, so as like mine here. That's the way they're getting the materials, not playing any video games like whoever it was. We have a designated time on the agenda for public comment and ask for the public comment on each agenda item. I ask that you be respectful of the need to conduct the committee's business. Should anyone disrupt the meeting, I'll ask the person to conduct himself or herself in such a manner that permits the board to transact its business. Committee welcomes public comment on any item on the agenda, and it is the committee's intent to ask for public comment prior to the board taking action on any agenda item. I want to remind all speakers to please stay on the topic and keep your comments within 3 minutes or less. I would like to call the meeting to the order and ask me, we did that. Approval of the minutes. The minutes of the July meeting are in front of you. Can we?
First, public comments not on the agenda.
That was on mine 3. So we have a little with the, I have on mine as an item 3, but public comment on the agenda items, which on the items not on the agenda. Do we have any comment? Okay, there are. That ends the item. The next one is approval. Item number 3, approval of minutes. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Public comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
You have to ask if there's any opposed or abstentions.
Are there any opposed or abstentions? Forgive me, this is the first meeting I'm starting, so. And even a surgeon gets a little nervous. Update on the plans for transition of staff pursuant to SB 304. Ms. Kirschmeyer and Mr. Gomez.
Good afternoon. I would like to begin by introducing the representatives from the Department of Consumer Affairs who are here today with me. To my far left is Mr. Awet Kadani, who is the Chief Deputy Director at the Department of Consumer Affairs. And also here today is Mr. Michael Gomez. He's the Deputy Director of the Division of Investigation and Enforcement Programs. So we'll be co-presenting today on this item. So I'm going to be kicking this off. We will have been holding meetings to discuss the transition. Our hope is to make the transition as seamless as possible. Today, we will be going over the transition of the investigators to the newly formed special unit entitled Health Quality Investigation Unit within the Department of Consumer Affairs Division of Investigation. Today, we will not be discussing administrative specifics such as the contracts that will be transferred or the process of moving the positions and those types of items. At the February meeting, we will provide documentation on all of these items. We are still in discussion on some of these items as well. Today, we will be focusing on the actual transition of processes and what this new process will look like. We will discuss how it impacts the board's investigation and administrative process, as well as how it impacts the vertical enforcement process. The board's packet has flowcharts that I will be going through to assist in this process. Mr. Kadani and Mr. Gomez will be going over the implementation plan and providing the timelines for the transition. With that, I would like to begin by asking you to turn to tab 4 or page enforcement ENF 4-1. And I will be going over just briefly the memo that's there attached. But before I do that, I want to kick this off to Mr. Kadani and Mr. Gomez if they have anything to add before we get into that. Okay. All right, so if you turn to that tab, in the first 4 pages, it provides a written analysis of the transition. I just want to point out a few things. If you look at the document itself, you'll see right in the beginning, the bill actually has changes that would move the board's investigators, which are our peace officers or sworn positions, medical consultants, and all of the support staff for those positions to a new unit within the Department of Consumer Affairs. So basically, those individuals will now become employees of the Department of Consumer Affairs. According to the bill, it will take place no later than July 1st, 2014. And it also states specifically in the language that all civil service employees will retain their position, status, and rights as employees. The new HQIU is what we're calling it. Will perform investigations not only for our board, but for all the boards currently that they're performing services for. So as well as our other healing arts boards that we do functions for, like licensed midwifery, RDO program, etc. So they'll be taking that over as well. It also specifically states that the board cannot be charged an hourly rate by the Health Quality Investigation Unit. As most of you may remember, when we first started this, when Dr. Levine and I went to testify, it was real clear that we told them we didn't want this to be any additional cost to the board, and so this was the way they put in the what we were looking for, cost neutrality. So that's that part in there. And then the last thing that I really want to point out is it retains the vertical enforcement prosecution model. It just transitions that over to the Division of Investigation to work with the AG's office during the investigation process. So with that, if I can figure out how to use the pointer. Okay. Oh, it's not very good, so I'll just walk you through. So if we can turn to the first flow chart there. This is our current enforcement process prior to Senate Bill 304 passage. This is on 4-6. I just want to point out that the items in red actually show things where the board has control and items that are currently performed by positions that will be transferred. So if you look at this chart, you'll notice that once the complaint's received, and the other thing I want to point out is this is all being performed by the Medical Board of California. There, you'll see that. So these are all functions that are currently performed within the medical board. So the complaint is received. Obviously, it's triaged by our central complaint unit. They look at it. If it needs further investigation, then it transfers to our district office. And I'm sorry if some of this is what you already know, but this is the only way we can kind of walk through how it changes. So once it goes to the district office, then the investigation of the case begins. It's assigned to both an investigator and a DAG, a Deputy Attorney General, at the Health Quality Enforcement section. And then they proceed through that process, and then together those two make a final disposition on the case. That final disposition is looked at by our Chief of Enforcement, our Deputy Chief, or by the supervising investigators and review that decision. Then you can see where that branches off, and basically the outcomes of those cases would be the case either gets closed, so again, those are being reviewed. It would either be going for a citation and fine, and again, once that goes for citation and fine, the informal conference is performed by the Chief of Enforcement or the supervising investigators or the Deputy Chief. It could also be referred to the Medical Board Health Quality, to the Medical Board back to headquarters for the issuance of a pre-accusation PLR. Again, that function and the negotiation of that public letter of reprimand with the respondent and or his attorney is all performed by our Chief of Enforcement. The other thing that it could do is it could be referred to the DA's office, and again, that is monitored currently by our Office of Standards and Training Unit, and they monitor and track all of the criminal activity. The other thing that could happen is it's referred to the Attorney General's office for appropriate action. And then that begins the prosecution of that case. So as you'll see there, once it goes over, then the Health Quality Enforcement section will take that and file the pleadings and take the disciplinary action necessary. Again, during that time, our Chief of Enforcement and our Deputy Chief, as well as our supervising investigators out in the field, all have settlement authority. So when a Deputy Attorney General wants to offer up a recommendation for settlement, that comes into our chief, and they go back and forth with the Deputy Attorney General. They're also available for any settlement conferences. So that's currently our process. Then from there, it goes to the full board. Of course, we are all your decisions that you see, the stipulations or the proposed decisions, and then the board makes that final decision on disciplinary action. That's our current process, okay? Are there any questions on that before I move to the next one?
Any questions from board members?
Yes.
Just one clarification. Under the first box, case closed.
Uh-huh.
So it's the DAG and the investigators who make the determination to close the case.
Yes.
And what is the in red on that box at the top,
Mhm.
to ensure appropriate action? Does that mean
So
that it was executed the way it was intended?
They have two functions. They're really looking at it to see if it was done appropriately. They're also looking to make sure that they agree with that activity of closure. There could be sometimes that they don't agree and they think that more evidence should be requested on this case. And then they can go back and it will go through a process where they review that with the Deputy Attorney General. And there's a process of going through a hierarchy where it starts out with the supervising investigator. It could go to the two, then to the Deputy Chief, and ultimately to the Chief, as well as Gloria, Ms. Castro, to basically reconcile any differences in that. Okay?
Any other questions? If not, go ahead, proceed, please.
Okay. So how is this going to change with the passage of SB 304? So as you can see, now we have another entity who's involved in the review of this case. So again, the case will come in, and again, it will be under the board's control now to review that case and determine if additional investigation needs to be performed. If it's required that further investigation needs to be done, it will now go over to the Division of Investigation Health Quality Investigation Unit for the investigation. That Health Quality Enforcement, HQIU, will work with the Attorney General's office to perform the functions of investigation. Where it will be different now is those individuals are now all employees of the Department of Consumer Affairs. So any of the decisions you saw in red on the prior page, they should no longer be making those decisions because, again, they're not employees of the board, and that final outcome on what happens with this case and the ultimate referral from that point needs to come from the board approval. And they won't have that authority any longer under the Department of Consumer Affairs. So as you can see, it goes over, they perform the investigation, but now it will come back over to the medical board once that investigation is completed, and an individual, a position at the medical board, will have to take over all of those functions. So they'll be reviewing the case to make sure that they agree with the recommendation by the investigators and the Attorney General's office. And if not, then they're going to be the ones discussing that with the Attorney General's office and probably also with the HQIU, as well as then an individual at the medical board needs to review the final action for a citation and fine and be now available to do informal conferences because it needs to be a board employee that has that authority of any outcomes on an informal conference for a citation and fine, and also signing off on the citation and fine, which is what Ms. Threadgill used to do in the past. That will have to be now done by the board. The other thing is for pre-accusation PLRs, that will have to be done now with an individual within the board, as well as the monitoring and tracking. That will just be an added function that we will follow through on the case. The referral will still continue out of the Division of Investigation or the HQIU, but monitoring that case and everything will be under the board. Then the other place where it changes is in the past, where it was the Chief of Enforcement that was reviewing the settlements and signing off on that settlement authority. Now that will be under somebody else within the medical board to provide that authority and be available for settlement conferences. But ultimately, the board still, again, has the final action on that case. Dr.
Ms. Kashmir, so who you are expecting at the board to do the first function you mentioned that is authorized once that comes to you, comes to the board?
At this time, we haven't identified a position. That's something we're going to be working on, whether we have to redirect a position or how we're going to be doing that. We'll be looking at that within the medical board over the next couple months to identify that.
Okay, and the same for the second one, that is?
Yeah. We believe that probably all of these functions could be performed by one individual at the board.
A new position?
How is this going to change the timeline or the expected timeline? The order sounds to be there's another step now.
There is another step in the review. I would hope that we would have a process where that can be reviewed quickly and responded to. In just talking about the case, even in discussions with Ms. Threadgill, what we're hoping is that the investigative unit would basically hold on to that case. We would get the information as much as we can do to review it, then we would approve it and then send them a note, okay, go ahead and refer that on to the Attorney General's office. Or, you know, if it's a citation and fine or a pre-accusation PLR, we're gonna get it all, just like we would right now. That process will still be there as what we do right now. It's just there's not a Renee or a Ms. Threadgill doing it. There will be somebody within the medical board doing it.
Is that because Ms. Threadgill is going to the Department of HQIU?
Yes, she's a peace officer, so her position would go over to HQIU.
And that position doesn't, because we have the final authority, that's why it has to come back to us.
Right, right.
Any other questions? Okay. go ahead,
Okay,
proceed.
then I want to talk a little bit, I'm sorry, I have to close out here. Sorry.
Jeff,
Dr. Levine.
just a comment, these charts are very helpful
Thank
in
you.
understanding the before and after.
Okay. Then how does this impact vertical prosecution? I know that's a question among the members that they have. So as you go through this chart, this on page 4-8, this is really what we currently do with the vertical enforcement process. So you'll see again, the complaint is received and reviewed by our complaint unit. Then it's referred to the field, and then you'll see at the same time going over, a lead prosecutor will be assigned to the case, and together they will determine if an investigation is warranted, if an ISO is warranted, and any other type of activity. So they'll be working on it together. Then from there, an investigator does an investigative plan and provides it to the Deputy Attorney General. And under VE, the Deputy Attorney General reviews the plan, and then they have to make suggestions and then approve that final plan. Then from there, the investigation is conducted. Back over on the medical board side, looking over there, the investigation is completed. However, as they're going through the process of obtaining records, through the interviews, through the medical consultant review and expert review, the investigator is providing all of this information and written reports and updates to the Deputy Attorney General, who's providing feedback and follow-up on their investigative activities. And then they also sit in on the interviews, as well as in the expert reviewer selection. So that's all going on currently. Then once the determination is made of the outcome, the disposition, then the Deputy Attorney General and supervising investigator determine that appropriate action, and then from there the case will proceed either to closure or into the administrative process where the DAG and the investigator will work together to prosecute that case. So that's our current process.
So are what we going to have now is a vertical enforcement three-way operation? Is that what
The
we're
next
doing?
slide will cover that specifically.
Oh, okay. 'Cause
Okay. All
Proceed.
right. Okay.
Three-way. We're going to have a three-way.
So,
Just want to make sure law enforcement's up on that.
So if you go to the next slide, which is on 4-9 now, you'll see that, as Ms. Yaroslavsky has pointed out, now we actually have 3 groups working on vertical enforcement prosecution. And really, the vertical enforcement is going to be just with the 2 units within the Division of Investigation and the Attorney General's office, but the medical board, again, will have input into that. So if you look at the next chart, you'll see again, the medical board receives the complaint. They will refer it to the HQIU, who's now, that group is going to be the one working with the Attorney General's office to identify the appropriate plan for investigation, the one doing the interviews in coordination with the Attorney General's office. Everything under there basically stays the same. It's just that it is not the medical board performing those duties. It's the employees of the Department of Consumer Affairs. Once it gets down to the disposition of that investigation, again, you'll see there in the lower two areas where you'll see the DAG and supervising DAG, they will still determine that, but again, it will go back over to the medical board where they will review the case to ensure the appropriate action is being taken and that they agree with that action. And then from there, the case will proceed through the administrative process. The DAG will be working with the investigator from the HQIU because that's their expert or their investigator in the case if they have any questions. But it will be the medical board who's filing the accusation, who's taking the final action, and proceeding through that disciplinary process, as well as looking at that settlement as we spoke of before. So that shows you how the vertical enforcement prosecution will change.
So let me ask you a question. Are these our same employees that are moving, or are they new employees of the Department of Consumer Affairs?
There are employees that are moving.
So no new employees, no new hires, just the same people, new titles, new bosses, new salary structure,
No, see.
higher salary structure, better benefits.
Member Awad Kidani, Chief Deputy of the Department of Consumer Affairs. Same employees. I don't want to get out ahead of the process and start speaking to whom and salary, who's coming over, where they're going to be. But before, we have a process and we have a timeline to address those. The most important thing to gather out of this part of the conversation is it is the department's intent with regard to this component not to disrupt, the current functions. I believe the Med Board and the department can learn from each other with regard to the processes. And in order for us to be successful, us collectively, we have to learn, adapt, and that requires us learning from staff who are currently doing what they do. So we do not want to disrupt anything.
I think my concern is this, is that I've read through this, I kind of understand what is the perception of what's supposed to happen, but the devil is in the details.
That's
okay?
correct.
So the idea of taking a group of employees who are currently doing a job with an administrative hierarchy that they all understand are doing it, they're now being moved and placed into another department where they're going to have new oversights and new engagement and new help that wasn't there before. I'm just trying to understand that from where is the medical board in this, is that now we have a consultant in the DCA that's more engaged and more involved. So I'm just trying to understand from what we do, as far as what we read, are cases going to be held up, take longer? Because DCA hasn't been a party to helping us understand what we're supposed to be doing at the Med Board currently.
And I understand that. One thing I do want to point out that I missed in here is this is the way several other boards under the Department of Consumer Affairs perform their investigations, in that the boards get to the point to where they're ready to investigate the case, and then it goes over to the Division of Investigation, not into our specialized unit. It is a little bit different because they only do it up to the point where the investigation's closed, not the expert review, but so this will be similar to
But in
that.
all due fairness, ours is a vertical enforcement, vertical prosecution
True, that
model,
is
which is
different.
totally different.
Yes.
And it's also, I didn't read the Board of Registered Nursing is within that. So that's separate, so that we're now the new largest entity that's moving, so it's a whole new pathway.
And according to the legislation, it is specific to the functions, that Health Quality Investigative Unit. They've named it in the legislation. Right. They've stated that it's the employees that are there that will transfer, and that they will perform those specific functions of the board.
Right, so they're going to perform the functions that they currently have been performing, but in a new house.
Yes.
Okay, I understand
Well,
that.
let me clarify that. It's kind of in a new house, but we're not moving anybody. Everybody's staying in the district offices. No employees are being moved to the Division of Investigation, to our field offices. They're all staying where they currently are. On July 1st of next year, no employee should be dislocated or moved or anything. They're going to stay
That I did not understand.
with
Thank you for that
the medical
clarification.
board. They're going to be there.
So the phones are going to be the same, or
The
they're going
phones
to
are
be
going to
different
be the same.
numbers?
The
or-
phones are, no, they're going to be the same numbers, except, With the exception, maybe with the exception of maybe a couple of the headquarters staff people that will be supporting this.
It's not like we're merging two entities together. We're not.
The
And that's-
reporting relationship, the reporting line has changed, is what's happened.
Right, but so the reporters, the people that are being reported out from the current positions that are being moved to a new house, they're gonna be reporting to a new entity or a new structure.
And yes,
Yes, okay.
yes, but the employees will remain intact into those existing district offices as we have today in your.
So from the consumer's perspective, what is the consumer going to see more involvement, more engagement, shorter timelines, faster turnaround, or are they going to see this, I mean, what should we be looking for?
I hope that in our presentation, when we talk about the transition plan, that the discovery of all those efficiencies, the discovery of what our current business practices are, the discovery of how we're going to be working with the health quality enforcement section of the Attorney General's office, looking at the vertical enforcement manual to revise that. And I think Kim and I have even talked about that there's going to be need to analyze and to work with our staffs and to make that a better product for the consumers, for the model we call vertical prosecution in the best interest of the public and best interest of the patients.
Could I also add to that, Mr. Yaroslavsky? Thank you. You know, I feel it important for the department to hold itself accountable through this process. You know, this is law. We have to implement it, and we have to do it in the best interest of the consumers as
Exactly,
well as
exactly.
our two entities. The department owes it to this body to get this right, and the Med Board needs us to get this right.
Absolutely.
I concede that. For that reason, what the transition team, which I'll speak to in my presentation, has proposed is that we use Med Board's current statistics, current numbers, and hold ourselves accountable by that, no less. And if for us to glean efficiencies, for us to leverage relationships that my colleague to my right has, even myself that I have, and kick the tires, you know, check the oil, et cetera, we should start seeing ticks in those numbers. If we don't, I will hold myself accountable and we'll keep adapting and getting better. And I would expect this board to also hold us accountable. So that's what I'm pushing for through this process.
I can appreciate that, and I apologize. I think that my concern, and to make sure that this is going to work, is that we also need to know what the process is to make sure that we're holding everybody accountable. So that's
Agreed.
why I'm asking so many questions, so I apologize for.
Thank you. There is a long presentation, but what I personally am expecting is that this board is responsible for all these actions. We are contracting with you in a legal way through by law to perform these functions. In the end,
That's correct.
we are the ultimate responsible people, and we hold you accountable for what happens. That's the way I'm looking at it. If I'm wrong, let me know, either of you.
Mr. Chairman, you're spot on that, and I appreciate the candor, and I appreciate it now and will continue to appreciate you and this body holding us accountable. I'm a true believer in transparency. I'm a true believer in if you're held accountable for something, you tend to perform at that top performance. I played sports. So when you're held accountable, you tend to perform better. So I look forward to you guys holding us accountable.
Thank you, Mr. Kidani. Dr. Yap.
This is the first time I'm on the committee, so maybe we're doing already. Just looking at that flow chart on the left-hand corner, usually board member, we at a position that actually the medical take action and come to the member panel A and B review. Just move one box up, the case reviewed by MPs to ensure appropriate action. What is the role of the enforcement committee now or in the future in this process? Are we seeing like aging account, like what kind of cases that being reviewed by the division and the timeline? Are we looking at every quarter the nature of the cases and whether the in the process being reviewed, in the process the passing which direction three-way, and then which is closed? Are we looking at those numbers as enforcement committee members?
So the board itself, actually, you'll see in Ms. Threadgill's statistics that are in the packet, it's very specific in each time frame. If you look at those
Right.
statistics, and you'll see them in the full board packet, we have so many identifiers from step A to B, B to C, C to D, and what you currently have in your statistics, Dr. Yip, and we will continue to have those after we make this transition. Mr. Kodani and I, we're involved in the BREEZE project, and we've talked about how our investigators are still gonna maintain the BREEZE system and still maintain it the way that they're currently doing in order for us to be able to still get those reports. There will be a time, I can tell you right now, that we will not have those statistics probably at the February meeting because we are building the reports that we currently have in the BREEZE system, but we will have them hopefully by the May meeting to where we can pick up to where we are right now. But those same statistics will be captured. The one thing I want to tell you too is the committee and the board members are not involved in that review at that point. That's the investigation portion of the process, and you're not involved in that, nor should you be at that point, because you have to be impartial judges for the administrative action at the end.
Right,
So
we're
you're
not
not
in
involved
that
in that.
role. I'm just saying, we would like to know the time process so
Oh,
that.
you have those
we'd be
statistics
responsible. Yeah,
currently right
exactly.
now in your
Right, we
packet.
do have it,
and
but
we
in
will
the future we also have.
Absolutely, we have every plan to keep those same statistics, because as Mr. Kodani said, that's the only way you're gonna know if there's any improvement, or if there's slippage, or
Right.
if we're staying the same. That's the only way we'll know at that point. So I just had, on pages 4-10 and 4-11, I'm not gonna go through those, but those are the organization charts that we have put together with our current structure, and then also moving forward with the structure of where, I'm sorry, I think I'm backwards, the new plan and then the current structure. So I'm not gonna go.
411 is current, 410 is proposed.
Thank you, yes, I was
Right.
backwards. And so, anyway, with that, I'm gonna kick it off to Mr. Gomez and Mr. Kodani to really go through the implementation plan, as I believe I've discussed.
Back to the proposed,
Can you use your mic, Mr. Sarnaki?
back to the proposed flow chart.
Yes.
Forgive my ignorance. What is CEA again?
A
G
CEA
for-
is a career executive assignment.
Ah. What is that? Is that like a supervisor, or what is that?
It is, it's like a higher level
Senior-
supervisor position, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and then with that, I'm gonna kick it off to them to go through the implementation plan.
Extension cord.
You try and get one through state service. I'm sure that they'd be very happy to find supplies for you. It's supplies, yeah. It's under the,
Mr. Chairman, members, thank you again. Awad Gidani, Chief Deputy Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs. As was previously stated in some of the questions that we answered and testimony by your executive officer, 304 was signed into law and will be in effect July 2013. That is a lot of pressure.
14.
I'm sorry, thank you.
Passed already.
It's even
14.
more pressure.
You already did it, is that what you're
That's
telling us?
right. That is a lot of pressure, and the reason why I'm stressing that is that pressure requires a tremendous amount of communication between your staff and also myself and my staff in order for this to work as envisioned in the law. The law did not envision us to disrupt anything. The law did not envision us to take anything away, a service from the consumer. In that, and given the importance of getting this right, the department has formed a transition committee attended by, and who's part of that committee is your executive officer, myself, Mr. Gomez next to me, my Deputy of Legislation, Christine Lally, Deputy Director of Board and Bureau Relations. The reason behind that is we want to get as many eyes on this as possible and ferret out the problems and challenges before it gets too far down the road. We've had a few meetings thus far and have been going very well. Your executive officer has given us input, different ways of looking at things, how this board does business on a granular level. That's information that we need to hear in order so we can adapt. This is not a one-way process. This is us merging together, for the best interest of the consumers. The last part I want to stress, which is me being here is very important. This is my project, and I want the board to know that it is imperative for the department to be as transparent as humanly possible. If the department and the board are wondering anything, or if there's any veil, then we're doing something wrong. The board should never wonder about what the numbers are. We're providing a service to this board. Pursuant to the statute, I mean, you said it very, very eloquently. So it is my intent to be as transparent through this process and even post-process as we are with every other board that Mr. Gomez provides service to. I will turn it over to Mr. Gomez and also entertain questions from the board after his testimony. I really appreciate the board accommodating me today. Thank you.
Well, I guess it's still good afternoon. Good afternoon, members of the Enforcement Committee, Madam Chair. Your interim executive director and your board chair had asked that we appear this afternoon to go through a transition plan and walk through it with you. So if you have any questions, we can do that when we get to it. But I'd like to do a couple things before I make my presentation. First of all, I want to look at Kim and say, Kim, I appreciate your coming to me and outreaching to the Division of Investigation at the signage when this bill was signed, and actually started working with us in collaboration of how we were going to walk through this together. And she's been very supportive to me. She's been very supportive to our initial steps in our transition team, and I just want to tell you thank you. Your spirit has been great. The three things I want to talk about is I want to give you a little background on who I am, what is the Division of Investigation, where the employees are going, and then look at the transition plan itself. I was appointed by Governor Brown last year, this month actually, as Deputy Director of the Division of Investigation and Enforcement Programs. I've been a law enforcement officer for about 25 years. Half of that time has been as an executive with as a bureau chief with the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training with the California Department of Justice, and almost a decade as the chief of the Division of Investigation prior to that. The division's mission has been one where we service and provide investigative services on behalf of the client boards, regulatory agencies, and the Department of Consumer Affairs. And our mission is to protect the consumers through that work that we do, to uphold the law, to work with our boards and our clients, and work with the Attorney General's office in the best interest of the patients and the public. You know what, we have some handouts right there. I've put the slide presentation that I'm giving on some handouts for you, and also a brochure that gives you a quick Good Housekeeping magazine look at who the division is. The organizational chart that's in front of you is similar to that which you see in your attachment in your binders that relates to the Medical Board of California. We're an investigative agency that deals with field operations. All of our investigators are peace officers under 830.3 of the Penal Code, and we share the same Penal Code authority as the current Medical Board of Investigators do under that statute. The difference is we are not in vertical prosecution where the Medical Board is. As my chief deputy has said, is that we are committed not only to working with this board and committed to working with your interim executive director and the staff, but we are and we have to embrace the vertical enforcement prosecution model and hopefully we can achieve some achievements through that collaboration as to how to make it work better. The next slide is simply, in your packet, is just kind of gives you a brief description of the division, and so you have a kind of a picture, if you will, of where the employees would be reporting to, so to speak. As I said earlier in the presentation, on July 1st, we do not envision any of your employees being moved from their current location or their district offices or from their places of work or relocating them, anything like that. This is a simple move at this time until we follow that transition process to determine where the needs are, where the investigative efficiencies could be achieved, and more importantly, by talking to our employees and talking to the Attorney General's office, and with the medical board executives, is what would be in the best interest in terms of implementing the law that we have before us. The next chart that I have provided is just, you already have this in your binder, is the proposed organizational chart. And you'll see that what has happened is that we've basically taken, or cut, I guess is a better word, taken that portion of the law that says that the peace officers, the medical consultants, and support staff would be transferred to the Division of Investigation under the new Health Quality Investigations Unit. So the org chart, you'll see, it basically adds the staff to the reporting relationship of the division within the division itself, okay? Again, we're not moving anybody from their current work locations or their current work status. I think that Kim and I have made a pretty good reasoning that it's important for us to follow the transition plan before we do anything right now. We can't represent anything. There's a lot of moving parts, and I think until we know how those parts are going to fit through that process and through the assessment that we're going to provide with that transition team, the better off we're going to be. And now I'd like to get into the transition plan itself. And that is in your packet as attachment A. And the major component, I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, is there a question?
Just a question about the medical consultants. They don't show up on.
What I did in the chart was, my understanding is they're already reporting to the district offices.
Right, but. And to whom, I'm actually not clear to whom they report in the district.
Well, I think it's two people, right? To the supervising investigator of the district offices.
So that relationship will remain the same?
Remains the same.
Function will remain the same?
Function will remain the same. Okay.
You will wait while we're there.
Yeah, do you have other investigative offices in all these areas for what the other work you do at DCA?
Yes, the chart that I think was number 2 in your packet. You'll see at the bottom, we have a headquarters operation, which is our internal affairs, our training, and our support, if you will. And then we have 2 areas, a south and a north. So we have a field office in Lakewood, one in San Diego, Ontario, Chatsworth, in the north, Central Valley, Sacramento, then another Sacramento location, and in Hayward, Bay Area as well.
So your aim is to consolidate some of these offices later on, or I'm just trying to see what?
That's not my aim. My aim is to implement what is required by law at this point. That's one of those moving parts that I don't have control over, and I don't think your interim executive officer does either, or director. We don't have that.
Yeah, I'm just looking at a business perspective. Right. That's why I'm just asking these questions. So.
Very astute question, Mr. Chairman. That's definitely not DCA's aim. Definitely not part of the transition plan. That's part of your packet. However, as leases come up, Department of General Services oftentimes, and I've been through it myself, will say, you have an office here, you have an office here, this lease is up, how about this idea of merging? That is not far from, the realm of reality. That could very well happen depending on when leases are up. Will not disrupt daily functions, will not disrupt anybody, you know, the way business is done. It's just the way Department of General Services manages their tremendous real estate portfolio, and a way for them to consolidate and maximize their dollar.
And that's correct, Doctor. And I think Kim will tell you that even in our current separate structures, we have that challenge a lot of times where they want to co-locate our investigative staff with the Department of Corrections staff or with Caltrans or somebody, just for that business reason, for the lease and the overhead. They'll do that as well. Yeah.
And I gather that you don't have any plans to consolidate staff positions at this time.
We do not. We do not have that. No, we don't.
So on the org chart that we have, don't go too fast yet. You're Michael Gomez, and you're the deputy director.
Yes.
Above you is the executive director. Is that,
Above me is
Mr. Kidani.
Kidani.
but that's not you. So who is that person? What's the executive director of this? Is this you? On the new proposed, is that Denise, or is that,
Denise is the director.
she's the executive director?
No.
Denise is the director of the.
On this org chart,
She's looking at your chart.
That's our chart,
that's gone
only
away.
for medical board. You need to switch now for proposed over to
To
page.
attachment H.
To the current, no, it's current to proposed.
4-14.
And I don't have it.
It's,
I'll take your word for it.
Look in the slide presentation that I gave you. It should be in that one. It should be the last page.
What I'm just trying to figure out is the transition team. Okay, I got it. It's here,
Booster bonus.
So you, Michael Gomez, the deputy director, number 2 person in the old chart. Now in the new chart, you're the number 1 person.
In the old chart,
Well, anyway, currently, what it's going to be, I'm just trying to understand.
Sure.
When we're holding feet to the fire, you report to us because we are contracting with you? You to report to DCA. So now we have DCA who are providing a service that they haven't provided to us before, really.
correct.
So now we really have not 2 bosses, we have 1 boss, but 2 bosses? No?
I don't know if I could try to take a stab at it, but
I'm concerned, it's just,
No,
it's
it's a
sounding
fair-
like it's not doing what I thought it was gonna originally do.
Well,
That's my-
here's-
Yeah.
and that's up for debate, but the law is the law, and that's
Oh, I
our.
understand the
it's
law is
our-
the law, but I'm trying to make
this is-
sure-
Let me express myself.
Yeah,
The law
please.
is the law, and it's our duty to faithfully execute it, period. And so, it is what it is. This function is moving to the Department of Consumer Affairs under Mr. Gomez's unit. He is a deputy director. He reports to the gentleman. The gentleman reports to the, goes up the chain of
Right.
command. These duties, these job classifications, all that stuff, they're now under the Department of Consumer Affairs.
Okay, that's what I wanna make sure of.
Yeah, and that's,
what
and
it
it's
is. Okay,
exact,
that's
so it's,
okay.
it's worth highlighting that point because.
That's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah,
Well, I
they
didn't
do
wanna ask
not
it
re-
that way directly, but yes,
Well,
that's
they
the
do,
question.
it's another way to look at it. They do not report to this board.
That's what I
They
wanted
don't.
to understand
You know, the
clearly.
collaborative working together, the open lines of communication, the transparency, all this is crucial to ensure the success of the legislation and the law. But the reporting, the strict reporting and the way it is as is being described right now.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
We have some oversight on other stuff, but
Right.
this day-to-day management is the duty of the gentleman.
Yeah, it's very similar to the AG's office. You pay the AG's office to perform a service of prosecuting our cases, and you will pay the Division of Investigation a cost for providing an investigative service. So it's.
Right.
So in some degree, they are your vendor. They're performing services for you.
Right, but the collaboration that was between the AG and our offices through the vertical enforcement, vertical prosecution model is going to be now handled. Okay.
Precisely.
It's a triangular entity now instead of 2 entities.
As
That
I
is
said,
Medical
it's a
Board,
three-way.
DCA, and the AG's office. And we, as I mentioned before, we as the Medical Board expect both agencies to perform what we are legally by law contracted out. That's all it is. So, but we are ultimately responsible, but that part is done instead of inside the medical board, it's done by DCA.
Okay, thank you.
And they report to their own boss.
That is absolutely correct. I do want to stress this point with regard to the triangular, the new triangular relationship that we have now. It is my anticipation that that will not slow down or impede
Good.
any process because, one, the AG's intent is to move these cases, you know, albeit complex and numerous, but it's in their best interest. It's also in our best interest to help them and assist them, to give them the data, to give them the evidence that they need. Mr. Gomez is an expert in this. I marvel at his knowledge of this. It's very deep. I also tend to push with regard to numbers. I have that bad habit. And as we get through this transition plan, the law is the law, and it basically says vertical enforcement starts at the point of complaint. That's really early. And with that, the AG will be our partner through this, throughout the entire process. So I'm actually pretty excited about how this will work out.
And just to add to what Mr. Gadani has said is that, you know, the department's performance measures actually measure those three components. You know, the complaint part, which is at the medical board, the investigation part, the investigation cycle time, which will now be in the health quality investigations unit, and as well as in the division for all the boards, and then the adjudication portion. Those are all measured now under performance-based budgeting. We have to report those. So we have the metrics that we're supposed to be following, watching, improving upon, looking for efficiencies wherever we can. In this relationship that we have, you know, I'm committed to it. I know that just in my brief conversations with Kim, she's my partner in this. And the staff of the medical board will be our partners all the way throughout, regardless of where they reside, whether it's at a new address at DFI or at the medical board on Evergreen. We are a whole department, and that's my view. That, you know, the mission of the department, overarching, is to protect all consumers, and we do it through the regulatory boards. We do it through the constituent agencies that are so vital to the enforcement and discipline of our licensees and the regulatory mission that we have as a department. So that's a view and attitude that I do share with Kim, that, you know, our not just our working together, but our really trying to do a lot of problem solving in this process of how can we make it better for the consumers of California and go down that road. So any more questions before I go on the transition plan? I'll go forward on, yes.
Just a general comment, which is we've been pretty much focused, because we have to and it's required reporting, on the time lapse components of metrics. And I think from our perspective, in terms of our day-to-day review of cases, it would be wonderful if we could actually, once the transition is done, is collaborate on doing a qualitative evaluation of the quality of the result, not just the timeliness of the result, and begin to look for opportunities to improve the process where, in circumstances where we end up with what we think is a less than ideal solution to a problem. It's obviously a more complicated task and would require us to do a little more work as we review cases in terms of where we think there's opportunity for improvement. But I think in the long run, from a process improvement point of view, it's an important kind of long-term result that would, I think, enhance the work in the future.
I can't agree with you more, Madam Chair. I think when you look at futures and how organizations grow and develop, it is looking at not just timelines. That's just a management tool, if you will. I think the qualitative part of it is the human asset, the human resources and developing of the work that they do and the value that they have, and the work, the ethics of leadership and ethics and consumer protection, and looking at the product. Is it thorough? Is it objective? you know, are we working closely with our prosecutor, attorney general, and our staff in terms of making it better
Are
for
we getting the
everybody?
right information? Are we interviewing the right people? Are we getting the right information? Do we have sufficient information in a case? And if not, you know, is there a role for either the medical consultants, the investigators, or the expert reviewers to begin to reshape some of the inquiry mode so that when we end up with a case, we have all the relevant information that will inform the best possible judgment?
As my colleague said, absolutely, I agree. And this is, again, this is where both D of I and the current Med Board staff can adapt, you know, and seeking perfection. Maybe not getting there, but that path of seeking perfection and constantly changing and adapting. I'm sure there has been things we've learned from the medical board, their processes, relationships, et cetera. Medical consultants is one of them. I mean, I don't know what we would do without medical consultants, you know, through this process, and vice versa. I mean, we have certain processes that I'm sure this board will benefit from. So through this process, I mean, to your point, I would love to get granular, you know, and realizing those benefits. I appreciate that.
So on that point, at the appropriate time, what you might think the appropriate time might be with respect to your working group, which is such a great thing that's happening. Might it be beneficial to have this kind of commissioner input, if you will? Because we see it from a different perspective
Sure.
than staff, et cetera. So we
Sure.
could have that honest exchange, and once your plan is further developed, we'll say, okay, here's what we think, and you may see some benefit in it, and can it be incorporated into as the plan matures?
Yes, sir. I think that will happen largely because as we go through the components of this transition plan, we are going to further develop probably project plans to implement those topicals, if you will. So when we get there, that input, that stakeholder input, whether it's the board, you know, the consumer group, the AG's, you know, we have to do this not only collaboratively, but I think with a great deal of transparency, because there's a lot of expectation to make this work. And you know, and Kim and I are maybe I'll speak for you because I know that you're kind of like me on this. We're committed to making this work.
So are we.
We are. We definitely are.
Also, you know, and this is memorialized in my colleague's plan. We owe it to this board to report back. And it's the different milestones we hit throughout this process, discussions with staff. We're going to report back during board meetings on where we are, challenges that we faced, ways we've mitigated, how we've adapted, what we've learned, and welcome any input from this body, because it will help us become better implementers of this.
Yeah, on that, actually, I have no doubt this board will be challenging you to improve the process. I mean, that's the entire goal, is to improve the process. That's what we are here for, how to get there faster and better. So that's what, so I'm sure we'll be challenging you, and I don't have any doubt that you will perform, so.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I appreciate that because I'm looking forward to that as well. I mean, you know, I once told somebody that look out for when you run for a public office, because I ran for city council once, and I thought that would be fun. It was challenging, to say the least, because I couldn't make nobody happy. Nobody. But it was worth it. It really was worth it. So with that, are there any more questions on the organization chart itself, or I'd like to maybe just walk through the transition plan, or just briefly give you the highlights of that?
Any questions from the board?
Okay.
We'll
In it-
take the public comment at the end of this item, so I'll wait.
Okay.
Go ahead.
In attachment A, in your agenda item number 4, attachment A, I think there's an item called timelines. And there you'll see a schedule of activities and events and meetings that happen throughout, through July, starting actually this month, through July of next year, and then will repeat itself in sporadic ways at the quarterly board meetings of the Medical Board of California. The major components of the transition plan is the creation of the transition team. The transition team is comprised of the Chief Deputy Director of our department, Kim Kirkmeyer, Renee Threadgill, myself, the Deputy Directors of our Communication and Public Affairs, our Ledge and Policy Review, and our administration, all the finance and fiscal and human resources, things of that nature. And the assignment of these topicals, which we haven't assigned yet because we're going to give that ownership after our first meeting, is who gets to lead on each one of the development topics of this, and where's going to be what I call the project plan for that. So you'll see throughout October, and I did this really, really briefly, is you'll see the initial steps of the plan itself. In December, we continue the enforcement discussions, working on vertical prosecution, working with Kim and Renee, the Attorney General's office, and what is it that we have? How is it working? Looking at the metrics, looking at the vertical enforcement manual itself. In January, we start refining the implementation strategy. We then, in February, flesh out more operational detail about the implementation itself. But throughout all this, I want the members of the medical board to understand that we will be at every one of your quarterly meetings to provide you updates on what's going on. We're going to keep I mean, you teased me a little bit about I better keep my smile or I better like the challenge, but I'm up for that. And I'm looking forward to working with this board and with Kim and Renee to make sure that this transition is not only transparent, but to the extent possible, seamless. And if we can find a better way to do and protect the consumers of California through the enforcement processes that are given to us by law, that's what we're going to try to do. And we're committed to that. So, we have the final steps, before the implementation in May, and in June, the state budget comes out, and we'll see what happens in the funding for everybody, whether it's on time or whether it's late. But the overarching issue in all of this has been that we're working collaboratively. We're trying to identify all the areas that could possibly be before us in a challenging manner that we can resolve and problem solve and implement for the betterment of this enforcement program.
Mr. Gomez, on state budget, I thought that this program is funded by the medical board, which is independent fund rather than state fund. So I'm just curious, how is that going to affect enforcement, which is pretty important for consumer protection?
It should not. The entire Department of Consumer Affairs is special fund. So such as the medical board, the RN board, respiratory care board are all special fund agencies. And yours is a little different than that your enforcement budget is coming over as kind of a neutral,
Furloughs, you've heard
a
the
neutral
word
budget.
Furloughs.
And I think the reason that it's on the slide is because that's when we find out if our budget is approved for the next fiscal year. So that's why in June we hope that the governor signs the budget just for the next year. So.
These are very brief milestones, but the detail is before you in attachment A.
Deb. So I've been dancing around, and I apologize, okay? You need to understand, I apologize in advance. And I've been dancing around my angst with this whole thing. And I understand it's the law, and I understand we need to implement the law. But I also understand, because I've been around for quite a while, that there's an issue always with staffing and lack of staffing, and staffing commensurate with being able to get the job done, and budget change proposals not being approved, and not having enough staff to do stuff, and having to pay overtime to make sure that things happen. And we're stretched pretty thin now. I mean, I don't hear a complaint from the staff. I don't hear a complaint from Kim. She keeps managing, and the staff keeps managing to deliver without question over and above what anyone could expect. And we all appreciate that. And I hope that from the DCA perspective and from the powers of Z, whoever's watching, or X or Y, whatever the letter is this week, that the understanding is that this is a whole new law that's been foisted upon the public in the state of California, and the expectation is everything's going to happen. But the time that it takes for you to do your stuff and your stuff and your stuff is taking away from the time that you need to be doing what you are being paid to do in the first place. So I want to just, you need to understand that my angst is coming from a reality check, Because I haven't heard about any offer up for additional staffing time or additional staff or additional people, or I'm not seeing that on any of these reports. And I just want you to be well aware of it, that I'm very concerned. Because you're gonna have burnout, and you're gonna have people angry, and you're gonna have, you know, you can only keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and after a while, there's just no more place to push. So it's great that you guys are all working together, and you're gonna make this all happen, and I understand very well that it's the law, but I understand also that there's an awful lot of riding on this as far as everything else that needs to be done. And so it's the licensing that's gonna be, it's everything else that we do, in addition to enforcement. Enforcement is a major focus. We had made a commitment under Dr. Ganadev's leadership that we were going to make some changes, and we were going to make some major, trying to figure out what we're doing, how we can do it better. If we can, we can. If we can't, we can't. But we were already going down that track, and now all of a sudden, there is this wet cloud. And no offense, I'm not mincing words. You need to understand that my angst is coming from reality. And you guys had better be prepared, Kim, you as well, that when it comes time for budget change proposals, when it comes time for new staffing needs, or it comes time for whatever needs to be done, that there needs to be a little bit, we need to not have to keep shaking that tree and hoping something's gonna land.
I'm just looking at Mr. Yaslovsky. It's just like physicians and the state employees, that is, work more and get paid less. That's about it.
That's
so-
the way it is,
and
but
you're
you know, after a while, I
supposed
get tired of it.
So-
So just understand, I want you to understand, it's not about you guys personally at all. It's about the system, and if the system's gonna have to work, something's gonna have to be, we need some help.
Definitely appreciate the candor. And what is not mentioned is not because we are not focused on it. There are processes within the BCP process that is being worked on. That's a separate process. And I believe your executive officer can speak to the fact that we are very, very mindful of what this board needs. I would be remiss not to take a full assessment of what it will require for both of these entities, DCA and the Medical Board of California, to get to that finish line of success. So I hear you loud and clear, and I share your angst.
Thank you.
And me sharing that angst is not a doom and gloom prediction. It's just a recognition of reality.
Yeah, it's
of
a
where we
reality
are.
check, that's all I'm asking you to be aware of.
I
Not that-
concede
understand
that.
how you- not asking for anything other than that.
Thank you.
I guess with that, if there's any more questions, I'll defer to Kim.
And I just want to let you know that we're not alone in this, and that it's, Ms. Threadgill, myself, Mr. Gomez, and Mr. Kadani, but we also have the Attorney General as a partner with us too, and I just wanted to offer this opportunity to Ms. Castro to come up and just make some comments as well. I know that she's been meeting as well and trying to get this process together for her as well, so.
Thank you. Ms. Castro?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Kim. Please allow me an opportunity to speak on behalf of the Health Quality Enforcement Section to say that we're very excited about this new partnership with Department of Consumer Affairs, DFI specifically, Mr. Gomez, and all of his staff. Our relationship with DFI actually will not be new. We deal with DCA and DFI investigators already in relationship with our current other obligations to our other clients, like the Respiratory Care Board, physical therapy, and other healthcare agencies that contract for their valuable investigative services. So we will build on that long history of interactions that we already have. And we're looking forward to the joint assignment of investigations between DCA, the HQIU, and HQE. And I don't see this as much of pressing a reset button rather than just continuing on and building on successes that we have already experienced with this important program and initiative that the legislature decided was an important product to keep for public safety and for these important cases. I too take it very seriously that from a statistical standpoint, you will want to see the proof in the pudding. And we are also prepared to shave timelines where possible and continue to make it work, get it right, and to improve it if we can. And we believe, at least the Health Quality Enforcement section, that we have been able to show you some qualitative results due to the vertical enforcement model. We have been able to produce serious discipline. We've been able to close cases earlier, brought against physicians that maybe are innocent or not as liable with respect to how they manage their practice. And that has allowed us to focus on more serious cases, to bring those to resolution quicker before OAH, and more importantly, to bring them to the attention of the public, and to identify where possible interim relief, such as interim suspension orders, Penal Code Section 23 matters, mental exams, things like that, that are identified with the help of the investigators. Now, in 2006, as we all know, the vertical enforcement model came into effect, and HQ was given authority over investigations and providing important advice, legal advice, through each step of the process. And one of the things that was identified was to avoid withdrawals and dismissals of cases and to identify other resolutions. And some of those resolutions include public letters of reprimand, citations and fines, or closure. And so in this intervening 7 years, we've gone through no less than 5 different manuals. And I think that this has built upon things that we tried and were not working, inventing of other processes to respond to public scrutiny and pressure. And I look forward to working with DCA to find where else we can cut on timelines. You know, these 5 versions of the manuals represent a lot of sweat and tears and discussions, all in the mutual interest of public protection and protecting patients, which I know that Mr. Gomez and I take very seriously, as do you and all your staff at the medical board. The vertical enforcement is institutionalized now. That did not change, and we are still your legal counsel, and we still provide you with valuable legal services by identifying cases that are meritorious. Now, throughout this process, we've always envisioned a dispute resolution process that allows the senior assistant of the Health Quality Enforcement section, which is me right now, to be able to arbitrate disputes where the investigators and the lawyers don't necessarily agree on an outcome. I think that in the meantime, we have found common ground in these disputes, and it's usually based on passion for a just result and for public protection. And throughout this process, our lawyers rely upon tried and true experience before the Office of Administrative Hearings, and also whether or not we have legal sufficiency. And that is where the investigators are partners with the lawyers, because according to the vertical enforcement model, we direct the investigations and provide initiative to be able to get it done and get it filed, and if not, to close the case. Now, I was happy to hear that Dr. Levine thought that the chart was helpful, and I found it helpful as well. I made some comments to it, and I thought that I should share them with you so that at least at this very early juncture where we're trying to make changes.
Sure.
So that it's just very clear right now while we're talking about what we're talking about, which is the vertical enforcement process, that it's very clear where we fit into these boxes. While we do have a team approach to all these investigations, we do more than make suggestions, provide feedback, and follow-up. What we do is we direct the investigation to get it to the logical conclusion of closure, filing, or otherwise. Throughout this process, we participate in critical junctures of the cases. We evaluate expert reports, we pick experts, we approve subpoenas. And throughout the process, we do not supervise investigators, but they're our partners in getting the evidence required to permit us, your attorneys, to advise you, our client, the board, on legal matters, such as whether you should file an accusation, dismiss the complaint for lack of evidence, or take other appropriate legal action, such as a PLR or citation and fine. And I think that it's important to note that there's always been a check and balance on how we relate to you. And one of those important checks and balances are that the Attorney General will evaluate a case to decide whether or not this investigation should be accepted for prosecution. But you, the board, bears the ultimate responsibility to decide whether it's something that you want to file. So none of those things have changed, and that check and balance would still be in play. I know that you are eager to make sure that we get it right, and I'm as willing as anybody else to be as transparent, efficient, and accountable to you, because it's the public's money we're playing with here. And it's the public, really, that we also have to be accountable to. And so we understand you want to see a return on your investment, you want to see performance-based metrics. I think we're ready to continue on that fine work. But I did want to underscore that throughout this process, the legislature has thought it important that the Attorney General's office makes the final determination of what constitutes enough of a case. And where possible, we do discuss these with the medical board staff to figure out a just outcome. And so currently the disputes are resolved through the dispute resolution process, which is all detailed in the vertical enforcement manual, of which I think the copies of it have circulated in prior board commentaries. So in any event, I'm pretty sure that we will get this right and we will do it better. And we will do everything possible in the health quality enforcement section to make sure it's a smooth transition, and we will not get in the way, and we will just continue our work. And one of our focus over the next 6-7 months, how long do we have? It's very short, is to provide input, advice, and get out of the way so we don't slow down the process. And so thank you very much for your time. And if you have any questions, I'm willing to answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Castro. Just first one I have is that with 304, does it make it any easier or faster to get the ISO? One of the things I constantly hear is from the consumers is that we can't take the bad doctors off the system quick enough. And that is an issue, and how can we resolve that issue? So that's where you come in, so to help us.
On the interim suspension orders, we're very eager to see legislation passed that your staff at the medical board put together. And that was to try and, discuss different solutions to try and take physicians out. As one would expect, the lobbying, was successful, and those changes did not go through. And specifically, we were trying to shorten the time frame for doctors who prescribe dangerous medications without indication to patients. Now, from the Attorney General's standpoint, we are very, very interested in identifying interim suspension orders, and it's a hurry up and wait approach. And so we do push on the investigators to try and get as much evidence as possible. But the truth of the matter is that this way that the statute is written has not changed, regrettably. So we still need to be prepared to fully defend a full-blown hearing after obtaining an interim suspension order with evidence. So we will work with Mr. Gomez's staff to find efficiencies and earlier identifications of those cases, such that maybe we can prioritize them early on, make co-assignments of investigators, and I'd be happy to make co-assignments of deputies as well to try and move those cases quicker. You already have everything you need. We just need to work faster on identifying those cases and throwing the resources we need. Believe me, none of us want to be left holding that body bag. None of us want anything to happen while we're trying to file this. It's a stressful thing to do, but we find it very important to move those cases. So we take it very seriously.
Thank you. It's prevention more than anything else, I think. Ms. Karshmeyer.
Yeah, SB 304 actually did extend the length of time for us to file an accusation, which I think is what you're talking about, Dr. Gonadev. The current time to file an accusation after interim suspension order is issued is 15 days. and that was lengthened to 30 days. So that will be an assistance to the investigation of the case, in that they have a little bit longer in order to gather more information to file an accusation. So that's what they're talking about for improving the ISO process.
Thank you. Any questions from the board to Ms. Castro? All right, thank you.
very
Thanks
much.
for coming.
Thank you.
Mr. Gomez and Kim, you got any?
I think we're finished.
Okay, any other questions from the board to Ms. Karshmeyer or Mr. Gomez, Mr. Kidane? Public comment, I got one slip. Karen Eldred.
Karen Ehrlich, licensed midwife, vice chair of the Midwifery Advisory Council. In the spirit of wanting to get this shift right and improve it, I want to try to capitalize on the suggestion of the team approach by making sure that people consider, when there are cases against other than doctors, other than the MDs, that a representative of the profession be included in all levels of the deliberations about whether a case should be brought against a practitioner. I believe that my impression has been that this has not necessarily been true in the panels and the medical consultants. Again, my impression that the medical consultants have been asked to weigh in on professions that they don't necessarily have training or experience in. And I would like to see that as a part of the team, as a change in this process as it unfolds. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? If not, we truly appreciate Mr. Kidane and Mr. Gomez for coming and giving us a report. And we'll move to the next item. Next item is the presentation regarding the enforcement program accomplishments. Ms. Sweet.
Good afternoon. Well, there's no denying that this has been a tumultuous year for the enforcement program on many, many fronts. And actually, the past 5 years have been exceedingly challenging, which I will explain a little bit more about shortly. It's been a little bit disheartening because we've heard the word broken bandied about as it relates to the enforcement program. And this adjective seems to have cropped up regularly after a widely read newspaper series criticized our seeming lack of omniscience. Our investigative staff has worked tirelessly to uphold our mission of public protection. We take our mission very seriously, and you can imagine our frustration. That is not to say there is room for improvement. We're always striving for opportunities to improve, but I feel like the investigators have borne the brunt of all of the dialogue that has taken place the past year. So I wanted to take this opportunity to highlight the accomplishments of the enforcement program.
Before you go further, I can tell you, Ms. Sweet, that this board does appreciate your hard work, so we want you to know.
I appreciate that, but I want to let you know what our staff has done. A lot of this information is extracted from our Sunset Legislative Report, but I think what happened is it was such a voluminous 400-page plus document that much of this got buried. So I'm going to take everyone through it, and I apologize because you can't really see those numbers very well. Between fiscal year 06 and 07 and 12-13, which is also encompasses when vertical enforcement came into play, we have seen a 351% increase in criminal referrals, a 100% increase in license restrictions and suspensions, which Dr. Gnanadev is responsive to your question to Ms. Castro about. We have made tremendous improvement in that regard. There's certainly opportunity to do better, but I think that's an impressive statistic. We've seen a 70% increase in license revocations, a 39% increase in completed investigations, a 36% increase in cases as referred to the Attorney General, a 26% increase in probation violations referred to the Attorney General's office, a 26% increase in overall disciplinary action, a 23% increase in cases resulting in probation, and a 15% decrease in the average time it takes to complete an investigation. And of course, that is with collaboration with our colleagues at the Office of the Attorney General, but the investigative staff have worked extraordinarily hard. Also, I just wanted to point out that these statistics will be different from what is in the Sunset Report in case you compare them, because I've included the last fiscal year numbers. But what doesn't get discussed, or I don't think was adequately conveyed, is the challenges and obstacles investigators face these past 5 years. So we were furloughed starting in 2008 and 2009, and at one point furloughed 3 days per month. And when you look at the working hours lost per investigator, these are staggering numbers. Our colleagues at the Attorney General's office were not furloughed during this time. However, we were. Then in fiscal year 2010 and 11, we were prohibited from hiring without going through a very arduous process. So we had a hiring freeze in effect for 2 full fiscal years, which adversely impacted our ability, obviously, to get staff to replace staff who had left or who had gone to other agencies where they were not being furloughed. As you can see, our vacancy rate increased to 17% at one point, but we've been working very hard to get that down to where we are currently, which is 2%. And as you can see, our time at investigation has gone down from an average of 349 back in 08-09 to 268, which I think is laudable. So for each individual investigator, there was a loss of 656 working hours. We had the hiring freeze. We lost a lot of vehicles, so there was a lot of staff time spent trying to justify vehicles and then dealing with having to redirect vehicles. We had travel restrictions. We had a new process requiring contracts for all of our, at one point, 1,100 experts, which involves tracking to make certain that they don't exceed a certain amount, and then we have to require another contract. So this is very time-consuming for staff. Ongoing challenges that have been faced. Subpoena enforcement still presents a big challenge for us. It adds an average of 154 days to a case through no fault of the investigator. Physician interviews add an average of 50 days to a case. The collaboration and review of the vertical enforcement process can add up to 75 days per case. And the one of the unique...
Can I stop you there?
Sure.
These are the places where we need to see how we can make an improvement. So can the staff tell us as you go through what can we do to these 3 problems you cited, 150 days, 50 days, and 75 days? I think this is where I think the issue comes up, where we hear from the media that it takes forever to get there.
Right. Right. No, I think these would be great opportunities to have parties involved from all interested facets who can impact this to address these issues. So one thing that's unique about medical board investigations is we do service cases from the cradle to the grave. Our sister agencies do not, they hand off the case at the point the expert review is undertaken. So that is unique to us. And this is a burdensome, sometimes very frustrating process to match the correct expert to the correct case, to train the expert, et cetera. So these are some of the things that we have done the past 5-6 years to increase our efficiency. We've talked about this, the H Case Council, where initially we lasered in on any case that was over 700 days old. We composed a team of the chief, deputy chief, the area commander, supervisor, the investigator, all the people involved in the case to try to troubleshoot ways in which to move the case along. I'm happy to report that we're now down to 550 days as the demarcation line for the H Case Council. So we have very few cases that are in that horrible state of agedness. The VE manual was revised with dual collaboration with the AG's office. The model disciplinary guidelines were revised. We entered into a transcribing contract for medical reports and interviews because this was a very time-consuming process of the investigation to have to summarize an interview. The best evidence is the transcript, so now we actually get the transcripts and our experts can call in and our medical consultants can call into this service rather than have to type out a report and utilize it. We've implemented strict timelines for investigators to obtain releases, records, conduct interviews, prepare cases for expert review. We provide detailed statistics to each supervisor to track case aging and production every month, a variety of statistics, case aging, production, the oldest cases in the office, and we try to generate competition among the offices to facilitate movement. And we've made some internal process changes by eliminating redundancies. For example, we used to have medical consultants prepare memoranda and the investigator prepare a summary of the same thing, of the interview. Now we have the transcript, so that saves time in that regard. We have fully implemented our field training officer program. We have provided 13 weeks of post-certified, instruction to our new investigators, which is above and beyond the 16-week academy that they attend if they don't have peace officer status already.
What is post?
The Police Officer Standards and Training, Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission. We've done 97 background investigations for sworn staff and hired 62 people. We sent all of our investigators, all of our staff to time management training. We, as I mentioned, have achieved the 2% vacancy rate, which is the lowest in 5 years. And we also provided,
How many of those 62 stayed with us rather than go to another agency?
Oh, that Ms. Threadgill has that information because we've recently compiled that.
Okay.
And then we provided 1 week of post-certified training for our supervisors. So post-certified training would be equivalent to your CME type of training. It's required a certain amount, obviously not as difficult as yours. Other milestones achieved, we provided, now it's an 8-hour course, but it's 10 hours of CME accredited expert training program for our experts. We reinstituted Operation Safe Medicine. We hosted training for investigators and received assistance from the AG's office on providing a segment relating to medical record acquisition techniques and strategies, including subpoena enforcement. We sought and were successful in getting legislation to require physicians to provide certified records, legislation calling for physician cooperation in scheduling interviews, which has been improved. And we have undertaken, this is something I don't think gets disseminated, but we've done at least 50 outreach efforts in the past 6 years to various hospitals, medical staff, consumers, and other law enforcement agencies. So we try to make ourselves available to educate the public. Currently in progress, we have our strike force, Operation Rex. We are planning statewide training specifically for our investigators for January for overprescribing cases. And we have our third comprehensive 8-hour expert review training session is going to happen at the beginning of next month. I'd like to conclude by saying I couldn't be more impressed by the work ethic, the ingenuity, the passion, and dedication that our investigators, supervisors, area commanders have shown the past 6 years. Their professionalism and tenacity demonstrate, despite one obstacle after another, that they have a tremendous level of character. And Chief Threadgill and I just want to take this opportunity to commend and thank our staff for their extraordinary efforts. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Before you leave, what changes in the SB 304 will improve our enforcement process? Like timelines for interviews, timelines for how many times the respondents, attorneys can postpone that type of, so can you explain to us?
Well, I think as Ms. Castro mentioned, and she showed you the manuals, there are opportunities when there's a whole new set of eyes looking at something to review some of these things. And I do think there are opportunities to tighten up some things in the manuals that we share with the Office of the Attorney General. I think just any time you have fresh eyes on something, it's an opportunity to look and maybe look at systems that, there's an opportunity to improve. Some of the things I don't see being resolved by where physically we are, some of the challenges that we face, the subpoenas, the record acquisition, some of our biggest challenges relating to time, I think are going to continue to exist just by nature of the work.
So I want to thank you very much for the report, because I think what it goes to show is that for all the bad stuff that we've been doing, it's really not as bad as we thought it might have been. So I don't know, it's always very nice to pontificate on what we don't know for sure, but here we have some facts in front of us, and I would hope that your staff or our staff would figure out a way to start telling the story, because we are doing a whole lot better than I think a lot of us realized. And you can't sit there and constantly do it, but somehow there's got to be some kind of directed expectation that the public needs to know that in fact that we are paying attention, that we are doing a better job, and the results are in the details. So I encourage you to figure out a way to get the story out there.
I agree. I think we are not conveying that information to the media and the public.
Yeah.
I think it's the public and then the media which gets on us. And that's why it is important to convey that information too, rather than we don't speak to media or something like that. So, any other questions from the board? Dr. Yap.
Is the expert training still on November 2nd?
Yes, it is, and I hope, I'll do a report about that, which, I don't know if it's bad protocol to tell you because it's very short. I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah, please.
It's November 2nd. Please, if you can attend, I invite anybody who can attend. It's going to be at UC San Diego at their Met building, which is architecturally gorgeous from what I understand. So we are a go, starting at 9 o'clock on Saturday, November 2nd until 5:30.
Is it 8-hour CME credit course?
It's going to be 10 CME credits, because we have the experts actually do a sample expert opinion, which takes a couple of hours. We give them a lot of clues during the training, so it doesn't take too long, but then we grade the opinion and give feedback. So we think that is helping generate a better product.
Is it only offered to the existing expert consultant, or who are the target audience?
Primarily, our experts are the preferred target audience, although anybody who wishes to attend may attend, as long as we have space. It's interactive, so the experts are all assigned a clicker so that they can participate and vote on scenarios and things like that. We only have 125. Plus, if it gets any larger than that, I think the productivity of the group diminishes, so.
Is there any way of using any kind of telecommunication protocols that you could run a similar kind of a program in another location simultaneously with another team, but not in place?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
It's something maybe
something we could look into.
For future, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I see this is a separate agenda item
Yes,
too.
yes.
So I want to make sure we're tracking our public comment on the first part of the presentation and, go down the line. I'm sorry, I didn't.
No worries.
It started bleeding in more and more, and I just want to make sure we're staying on track.
That's why she's sitting on this side of me. Any other questions for Ms. Sweet? If not, public comment? I have no slips, so it's free. You can come up. None? Okay, with that, we'll go to the item number 6, which is discussion on suggested improvement to the enforcement program and review of the member survey results. It's me. We took this on and I sent this out to the committee, and I did get some responses. But we thought in this enforcement committee meeting, because we had an item which was unexpected came on, which is 304. So we thought we spend a lot more time on that and see where we're going first before we go and see how can we make improvement. So that's why my suggestion is to defer that item to the future board meeting till we see where we're going with how we're going to streamline the SB 304 process and the enforcement. I think that's our priority for this committee, priority for this board, so that's what my suggestion is. Unless any board member has any objections, we'll go to the next item. Thank you. What's next? Item number 7, update on Operation RX, prescribing task force, Ms. Sweet.
Okay. Our prescribing strike force has been working extremely hard on overprescribing investigations exclusively. Since the last board meeting, 4 physicians and 1 physician assistant have been arrested or have self-surrendered with criminal charges pending. A total of 3 search warrants have been executed, one of which resulted in the seizure of 250 boxes of evidence. And to illustrate kind of what the work in a search warrant involves, the case investigator actually started the day at 5 a.m. for briefing and went until 3 a.m. the next morning working on that particular case, because the search warrant involved 2 counties, and they also did a final undercover operation as part of the tactical event. Since its inception, Operation Rex has conducted 15 undercover operations and has procured about 2,000 physical prescriptions. Numerous search warrants are in the planning stages. They've also concluded 3 investigations where it was determined the physician was practicing within the standard of care. Currently, the unit has 27 cases in its caseload. A unique aspect that we are learning about relating to these cases is the need to coordinate with so many other interested law enforcement agencies. So Operation Rex staff have met with the Drug Enforcement Agency and are working cases with them, the Department of Justice, the Office of the Inspector General, and the FBI, as well as numerous law enforcement agencies in each town where they go, because they're traversing the state. And then they're also working with a variety of prosecuting agencies and are going to be also working with the United States Attorney's Office. So they've been remarkably productive. As we've talked about at previous meetings, overprescribing cases are fraught with challenges because of the sheer volume of material that's necessary for a successful prosecution. But our dedicated investigators have risen to the challenge, and I want to commend their efforts to date, and we'll have more to report at the next board meeting. Any?
Thank you, Mr. Slauson.
I hear all the different parties that you're going to be collaborating with, and I'm wondering about the opportunity for other health professionals, providers, physical therapists, nursing board, pharmacists, all of them, that have you ever considered having some kind of a meeting with them to figure out if there should be, like, say, a directed phone line, a directed anonymous tip place for professionals, for not just the public, but I'm hearing about, I'm just hearing about, and I'm just telling everyone that I talked to, that they should automatically just file a complaint with the medical board. But it seems to me that they're feeling that they need some more hand-holding or directed service opportunities. So it's something that you might want to think about.
Absolutely.
Collaboration with other health care providers.
Ms. Sweet, you gave some numbers, what the task force did. How do they compare to before? Comparative period.
Zero.
That's a hard question to answer because they're such time-intensive investigations. And what at some point we will be able to do is look at because they took cases that had been were being worked in the field. So some of those cases were at varying stages of aging. Once we get to a point where the task force is taking clean, brand new cases, which they are, we're starting to send them brand new cases, we'll be able to compare the time it takes for them to resolve their cases, having a lower caseload than to investigators who have, a regular caseload in addition to the prescribing cases. So, but at this point, it's too new to give any, decent data.
If you can give us in the future how the timelines are.
Okay.
How long is it taking to really, as we go forward?
Okay.
So that would really to help us to see if we're getting more efficient. That's all I'm looking for, more efficiency. Thank you.
Will do.
Any other questions from the board members? If not, public comment? Any public members commenting? Okay, that will take us to the next item. Ms. Sweet, you're on the hot seat again.
Okay, just to,
Update on export reviewer training. What update you can give more?
okay. Well, November 2nd is the big day. If you can be there, please check it out. I think you'll find it interesting, and we're giving CME credits, and we hope it's as successful as the previous trainings have been. We have a great lineup of speakers.
Yeah, I encourage board members to go. Unfortunately, I'm going to be in Philadelphia at AAMC meeting, so I couldn't make it. So that's why I think it's good to have 1 or 2 board members. I truly appreciate if anybody can go. Thank you. Any public comment on this item?
Do we have an animal in the room? Okay, I saw something fly before, so I didn't know what was going on.
Public comment.
And it's one under the table by you.
Is that what it is? I mean, I saw something going somewhere.
Yeah.
God, they don't
Okay,
bite.
next item is
Where's that
item.
law enforcement guy? Tell him to get over. Are you guys, don't you have guns or something? Weapons? I mean, my God.
Well, this item was not on the agenda, so we can't go there. Anyway, item number 9, probation monitoring presentation, Ms. Katie. I saw that.
See?
Something fly down there, went right under the
It's a
table.
historic hotel for a reason.
Oh, my God.
Should I wait? Should I-
Put the camera on it. Put the camera on it.
Thank you.
It's so dark, you know?
It is so difficult for me to.
For the first 2 minutes of nervousness is a long time.
Good evening, almost. Now we'll focus on a little bit another aspect of the enforcement program. I was asked to provide the committee with some background information on the probation monitoring unit and how this program monitors the physician's compliance with the terms and conditions ordered by the board in its disciplinary orders. By way of background, there are 561 physicians currently on probation. Of that number, approximately 444 are in practice. 117 are in a category that we would call pended or told, which means either they're out of state or they're in California, but they're not practicing. We still monitor those individuals, but the contact with those physicians is less frequent and usually is done by phone or in writing. The probation unit is staffed with 15 inspectors who are located throughout the state in the board's district offices. Each inspector has a caseload of between 25 and 35 physicians to monitor. When a physician is placed on probation, the inspector meets with the physician prior to the effective date of the decision to conduct an intake interview. During this interview, the inspector goes over the decision with the physician and explains each one of the conditions. If the physician is required to maintain a log, like a controlled substance log or a chaperone log, the forms are provided and explained to the physician.
Ms. Katie, are these inspectors, probation officers, based in our offices in the Southern California, I mean, all over the state, or?
All over the state, yes.
And when they meet with the physicians go to their office, our offices?
They do it either way. Sometimes they will meet with the physician in our district office. Sometimes they'll meet with them in their office. So they'll make arrangements with the doctor in terms of what's convenient.
Thank you.
At the end of the intake, the inspector will also go over any of the timeframes that the physician must meet, like when do they need to enroll in courses, when do they need to identify practice monitors. So all those are explained during the interview. The inspectors also meet with the physicians, as I mentioned, with each physician in their caseload every single quarter to review their progress and get an update on how they're doing on probation. They usually discuss issues like, is the physician working? Have they completed the required courses? If they haven't, what's the status? Have they enrolled? Trying to get a sense of where they're at in complying with the terms. We also usually discuss with them whether we're receiving reports, if they're required to be in therapy, if they're required to have a practice monitor, those individuals provide reports to the probation unit. But we hold that physician responsible for making sure the reports are received. So we usually will let them know if there's any problem in receiving the reports. We also want to find out from them whether they're having any difficulty meeting any of the ordered conditions. So after the interview is complete, the inspector prepares a quarterly report that summarizes how the physician is doing, what the status is of their compliance with all the terms and conditions. And if there are problems identified or if the physician is not in compliance, they'll usually send a letter to the doctor sort of to reiterate what was of concern, what timeframes need to be met so that they can be in compliance with their probation. Whoops, wrong direction. I thought I'd focus today on some of the common conditions that are ordered for physicians on probation. Almost 50% of the actions that are taken by the board charge the physician with gross negligence and incompetence. The disciplinary guidelines will require that, or will recommend that probation be given with various educational courses and typically a PACE assessment. For the benefit of some of the newer members, a PACE assessment, PACE consists of a 2-day assessment, which includes computer-based testing, which covers medical knowledge pertaining to the physician's practice specialty. The physician is given an oral clinical exam while they're there, and there's usually an assessment of the physician's general health during that 2-day assessment. PACE staff will then review the results of the 2-day assessment and develop a 5-day, 40-hour program of clinical evaluation and education, and they use medical staff or medical faculty from UCSD to provide those services. After the full assessment is complete, PACE then prepares a detailed report with their findings and any recommendations they may have for the physician to remediate deficiencies that are identified through the assessment process. One of the things that we've noticed in the last couple of years is an increase in the recommendations for a neuropsychological evaluation from PACE. With an increase in the number of aging physicians being referred to PACE, the screening tests that they perform are starting to identify some cognitive deficiencies that could impact a physician's fitness for practice. So typically they'll request that additional evaluation. After those evaluations are performed, if no deficiencies or no problems are identified, the physician continues on with the assessment process. But sometimes those evaluations uncover a problem that shows that the physician may not be fit to practice, and sometimes the physicians will opt to surrender their license at that point in the process. As you can see, the majority of the physicians that are referred to PACE successfully complete the assessment. In the last 2 years, only about 17 physicians have been referred for additional administrative action for noncompliance with the requirement to complete PACE assessment. The primary reasons that the referrals to the AG's office are made are either the physician doesn't enroll in PACE, or he enrolls and doesn't complete the full program within the time frame specified, or they discover an underlying medical condition that affects fitness for practice. And so all those are rolled in. Yeah.
Ms. Jaslowski.
So I have found that our using of PACE has been a very good asset, that it really has given us the extra safety net to ensure that the person is either capable or competent or not to practice. My concern is that with a person that decides not to complete or not to pass or not to enroll,
Yes.
how much time is given to that person? How often is it checked? I mean, how long is a doctor allowed to continue to practice before we catch him or her?
That's part of what the inspector does as a part of their regular monitoring. So typically the decisions require that within 60 days from the effective date of the decision, the physician has to enroll in PACE. So usually at that next interview, the inspector is asking what the status is. If the doctor hasn't enrolled, then that's a compliance issue that they would identify. What we see the doctor is also required to complete the PACE program within 6 months from when they've enrolled.
Right, these are all new, by the way, for those that are new members. Those are pretty new requirements, which are great.
Right. The timeframes help us keep track and make sure that this doesn't stretch out too long. There may be some legitimate reasons why the assessment can't be completed within that time frame. Sometimes there are issues with the physician, either his scheduling, general health. There may be some issues that where we would not jump in at the 6-month point and start pursuing noncompliance. But
So let me ask you a question. So we can assume that those doctors that have been required to be involved with PACE somehow, that within a quarter or within 6 months, they have, in fact, either they are in the program, or they are completing the program, or they are going to be disciplined for not being there?
Correct.
Okay.
One of the new tools that we've got that's been very successful too is we've added in the disciplinary guidelines the ability to issue cease practice orders for a variety of conditions. PACE is one of them. So non-compliance, we could issue a cease practice order. The benefit of those orders, and I don't know that it's been an issue thus far, but the benefit of those is the physician quickly comes into compliance.
It's also condition precedent we've done.
We've done that too.
Which is
Yeah,
also-
it just depends on how the board has decided it's best to implement that.
On the 17 people who failed or did not comply, do we have what specialty they are? One of the complaints I used to get before I got on the medical board is the PACE program is more or less for internists and family medicine docs rather than a urologist or a dermatologist who rarely does that stuff. So do we have any numbers on that?
We could certainly pull that, but one of the benefits, or one of the things that we haven't really run into that problem with a practice specialty, but because they're using their medical faculty, they typically will have a number of physicians to be able to address the various unique specialties. But that could be one of the reasons why a physician may not be able to complete within that 6-month period, because PACE is trying to pull various faculty members together to provide that assessment. Okay, let's see. If there's no more questions about PACE, I'm going to go ahead and move on. Substance abuse is another category that results in physician discipline. When a physician is found to have a substance abuse issue, the disciplinary guidelines will typically recommend that the physician undergo a medical or psychiatric evaluation, receive ongoing therapy, and there's usually a requirement to abstain from use from drugs or alcohol or both. Random biological fluid testing is always ordered to ensure compliance with the abstain from use conditions. The board has a contract with First Lab to provide testing for physicians on probation. The physicians will set up an account with First Lab, and they're provided with a listing of testing facilities and locations within the geographic area that they're in. So then the physician is required to either call in every day or log into First Lab website to determine whether they are being required to report for testing on that particular day. If ordered to test, the physician's required to report to the lab that same day. Failing to submit to testing on the date ordered can be identified as a missed test, and that could be considered a violation of probation. Each of our inspectors has the ability to log into the First Lab website and, as part of their regular monitoring, look at the physician's record of contacts with First Lab, along with any of the results from their tests.
Ms. Katie?
Yes.
Ms. Jaslowski.
So before you go on that, I don't know the company that you're speaking about. I don't need to know the company you're speaking about. I just need to know that this is the only method of having testing done, and that it is available throughout the state on equals, because I'm understanding maybe not. That's why I'm asking the question. So my question is this, have we ever considered, in addition to that, having alternative sites set up, like within a hospital? I mean, or within a alternative practice, to make sure that we don't have any lapses?
One of the
Or
things,
not only lapses, but I'm sorry, but the idea that a doctor should not have to drive 2 hours because they live in a remote
Absolutely.
area and be penalized because they don't.
that has been arranged. There have been some unique circumstances where there is not a lab that's conveniently
Right.
located to the physician. That's the exception, that rarely happens.
absolutely.
But
You're
yeah,
right.
we set up some sort of alternate arrangement. I think we've had one physician who was able to do the testing in their hospital setting.
So we're being flexible.
Oh,
We're not-
absolutely,
okay.
absolutely. Let's see. One of the other thing that I wanted to tell you about how we monitor the biological fluid testing is we have an analyst in our probation unit whose sole responsibility is to review the results of all positive tests to monitor for compliance with the abstain from use requirement. Before it can be determined whether a positive test is evidence of a violation of probation, the analyst first has to take a look at the specific decision for that physician to identify whether the positive result corresponds to a substance that is restricted or banned in the decision. The next thing that the analyst has to do is rule out whether the physician has a legitimate or valid prescription for the substance that is showing up as positive in their test. And then finally, the physician is interviewed and asked to provide a response or an explanation for the positive test. Once all that relevant information is gathered, the analyst also consults with the medical review officer at First Lab. And then we'll come up with a recommendation for the probation unit manager as to whether a violation has been identified. If a violation has been confirmed, the board can issue a cease practice order, which will remain in effect for 15 days. The cease practice orders are signed by the chief of enforcement. At that point, an accusation must be filed within 15 days or the cease practice order will expire. So given the short time frames that are involved with these, the probation unit also consults with and has a DAG look at all of the information that has been obtained thus far, so that we're sure, if we're going to proceed with the cease practice order, that we've gathered all the relevant evidence that will sustain a filing. Any questions? Yeah.
What's the next step once we put in a cease practice order? What can the respondent do, or what happens next?
What happens next is we issue the cease practice order, it's transmitted to the AG's office, an accusation is filed, and that's where the physician's due process rights come into play. So he or she will have a hearing. And we'll charge him with a violation of probation, basically.
If they sign an agreement, a stipulation that they will abstain from alcohol or drugs, whatever it is, and they're found to have been positive, okay, so we're only talking about that group of people,
Sure.
which is probably very small. Do they lose their due process rights if they would sign with a stipulation if they are found to be in violation of their terms and conditions of the stipulation, that they would surrender to an immediate cease practice?
The stipulation is in essence the same as a decision. So in the language in the stipulation, it usually has that cease practice order.
It's written in there? Okay, I
Yeah, it's
didn't know.
usually in there. Yeah, we pull
Okay.
the same language in stipulated agreements.
Okay, thanks, I wasn't aware.
Dr. Levine?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that does not prevent a physician from challenging.
Right.
Oh, absolutely,
I mean, and that's where the quotes
Right.
due process rights comes in.
Exactly. I thought I'd give you some information about the number of physicians that are being tested at this point. In the last fiscal year, we had 120 physicians who had that biological fluid testing requirement. About 30 of them are out-of-state physicians and therefore are not required to test in California. Our data showed a total of 55 positive tests that were considered actionable, meaning the physician had no prescription for the banned substance or the test was positive for ETG/ETS, which signifies alcohol consumption. The number of positive tests does not necessarily mean that 55 individuals tested positive for drugs or alcohol. Instead, the same physician could have tested positive on multiple occasions, and then in the petition to revoke probation, it would reflect the number of circumstances or the number of positive tests. So that doesn't necessarily represent a total number of individuals.
So 55 could represent 23 physicians.
Could, yes, yes.
Does it?
I can check that for you. You know, some of the reasons that we would pursue a petition to revoke could be non-compliance with that the doctor is called to test over and over again and doesn't report. They don't always translate into that being specific positive tests.
Can one, in some egregious circumstances, can an ISO come into play there?
Certainly, and that would be a decision that would be made by the DAG reviewing the case, whether this is an ISO case. Let's see. Finally, I thought it might be interesting to take a look at some statistics on the number of physicians who have completed probation in the past 2 fiscal years, either successfully or unsuccessfully. 160 physicians have successfully completed their term of probation or petitioned the board for early termination of probation. Now I thought we could talk about some of the unsuccessful completion, so to speak. If a physician fails to practice for 2 years while on probation, the board proceeds with an automatic cancellation of the license. You would typically see that automatic cancellation come in out-of-state discipline cases where the physician, we're taking action based on action taken in another state. The physician is licensed in another state and resides in another state. And although he or she has a California license, we've disciplined it the same as the other state, but they have no intention of coming to California. So those automatic cancellations is what we would consider an unsuccessful completion. One of the more common concerns we hear from physicians on probation is that it becomes difficult to be accepted as a provider in some insurance plans while on probation, and the costs associated with probation are high, especially during the first year of probation. Some physicians opt to surrender their license if maintaining a practice becomes too difficult. Notwithstanding some of these difficulties, there are a number of physicians who fail to rehabilitate during their probationary term and are referred back to the Attorney General's office for subsequent discipline. As we all know, the goal set in statute is to rehabilitate and remediate physicians while ensuring adequate protection for the public. The conditions identified in the disciplinary order are designed to meet this goal, and the role of the probation unit is to give the physician the tools and the information necessary to meet the conditions that have been ordered. The inspectors are also charged with monitoring the physician's practice to ensure that the patient protection components are being adhered to as well. Not all physicians and situations are always appropriate for probation monitoring. We see a number of physicians whose behavior does not change after the training and the coursework, but when subsequent disciplinary action results in just additional probation time and a repeat of the same terms and conditions, we don't always see a successful conclusion. We've had some physicians placed on probation who are diagnosed with psychiatric conditions that are not being well managed with medication. And those are really problematic for the probation inspectors to manage. we can't necessarily ensure that the physician is going to continue on their prescribed medication. And sometimes those, when the physician chooses not to take their medication, they end up back in a subsequent discipline. So what I tried to do was give you sort of a general overview of probation monitoring. If the committee has any specific areas of interest, I would be happy to address those in future meetings.
Thank you. And I have one fairly simple, I think, question is that because once you're on probation, many hospitals don't give you privileges.
Yes.
Many insurance companies don't put you on, and often the government programs like Medicare and Medicaid don't contract with you. So if you are a physician, he or she made a simple mistake, that is, went to a bar at 6 p.m., had a couple drinks, and somehow or other stopped by a policeman, and the court puts you on probation, but with us, we got to follow the standard. So what do we do with those people? Never had a problem, we have great recommendations, good doctor, it was a simple little mistake in the evening on a Saturday night.
You're just lucky they didn't kill someone on the way home.
I agree. I'm just trying to see how do we really work on their probation terms, or what do they get, how do they can get a job and really rehabilitate themselves. I have no doubt on my, I agree with you, Ms. Oslowski, but I'm just trying to see how can we help these people.
A single DUI is not necessarily a violation.
Okay.
And we may not take action on a single DUI unless there are some special circumstances associated with it, like an excessively high blood alcohol level, which gives us an indication that there's a problem. We would have the doctor examined, evaluated by an addictionologist, and determine whether or not it's something that we need to have him disciplined for, or put something in place to protect the public and him.
But Dr. Gonadev, in all due seriousness, I apologize for being flip, it's the hour of flipness. It seems to me that we do have a responsibility of making sure that we educate our physician population to the ramifications of what happens if you get into trouble. I mean, that's what our newsletter is supposed to do. They're supposed to educate physicians on all sorts of things, and maybe we need to do a better job to make sure that they need to realize that something, that a license is really serious, and you've got to take it serious, and the protection of the public above all else, they've got to realize that if they're going to do the crime, they're going to pay the time, however, the thing goes. We've got to do a better job.
I was just trying to see a special scenario, what would, I think you answered my question. And
Two DUIs is another story.
Right.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, in my hospital, I have 170 residents. These are young people.
Mm-hmm.
So as I just left as a medical director only a few months ago. For 13 years, I did that job. So one of the important things I learned to tell them once I came on medical board is protect your license.
Exactly.
Don't make dumb mistakes. You spent enough time in your life to get this far. So I'm just trying to see how we can, that unfortunate one who made a simple mistake and hasn't hurt anyone.
Right.
That's why, that's important to also. Any questions to Ms. Cady and board members? Yes, Dr.
Yeah, I
Levin.
just want to emphasize the point you made. I think residency program directors who do not make certain that physicians understand that it isn't just what they do when they're in the office seeing patients, but that their behavior outside the exam room and outside the hospital can have an impact on their license. And even if patients aren't involved, and from reading cases, we know that physicians are often challenge, or sometimes challenge the discipline because no patients were harmed.
Right.
And it is really a failure of the program directors to not ensure that physicians understand that license is a property right, but it's not one they have a lifetime entitlement to.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? If not, public comment? Thank you, Ms. Cady. Okay, we're coming to the close. No bar after, no, don't go to the bar and drive afterwards. So the last item on the agenda is agenda items for February 2014 meeting. So in addition to update on the expert reviewer training, an update on the prescribing strike force, and an update regarding the implementation plans for the transition of staff pursuant to the SB 304, are there any additional items to be considered from the board? Okay, if none, any public comment? Thank you, and there is being no other business, can we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I just want to see if anybody's opposed. Thank you.
Great job, Deb, great job.
Thank you, thanks for putting up with me on my first meeting.